Hunger is a ghost. It starts in the stomach, a sharp, twisting knot. Then it moves to the blood. You feel cold, even when you are near a fire. Your body begins to consume its own fat reserves. Then it eats the muscle, then the organs. But the final stage of hunger isn't physical. It is psychological. It is the moment when the line between human and meat begins to blur. In the winter of 1846, 87 people were trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They were fathers, mothers, and children. They were wealthy and they were poor. They had packed their wagons with heirlooms and dreams of California sunshine, but they never made it to the sunshine. Instead, they found themselves encased in 20 feet of snow, cut off from a world, and left to make a choice that has haunted American history for nearly 2 centuries. This is not just a story about cannibalism. That is the sensational headline. This is a story about a series of small, fatal mistakes. It is a story about pride, bad timing, and a trap laid by nature itself. Tonight, we're going back to Truckee Lake. We are going to sit by the fire with the Donner Party, and we're going to watch the snow fall. To understand the horror of the end, we have to understand the hope of the beginning. America was catching a fever. It was called manifest destiny. The idea that it was God's will for Americans to expand west, to touch the Pacific Ocean. The newspapers were full of stories about California. They called it a paradise, a place where winter never came, where crops grew without effort, where a man could reinvent himself. For George Donner, a 62-year-old farmer from Illinois, this was the last great adventure. He was wealthy, well-respected, and seemingly too old to be uprooting his life. But the fever had caught him. He packed his family, his wife Tamsin, and their children into huge, custom-built wagons. Then there was James Reed. Remember that name? James Reed. He was an Irish aristocrat, a businessman, proud and perhaps a bit arrogant. He built a wagon so large the other travelers called it the palace car. It had 2 stories, a built-in stove, and cushioned seats. He wasn't planning to survive the journey. He was planning to tour it. In May of 1846, 9 wagons rolled out of Independence, Missouri. They joined a massive snake of pioneers heading west. At this point, they weren't the Donner Party yet. They were just families. The Reeds, the Donners, the Murphys, the Breens. They followed the standard route, the Oregon Trail. And for the first few months, everything was perfect. They made good time. The children played tag alongside the wagons. At night, they circled up, played the fiddle, and sang songs. Tamsin Donner wrote letters home saying, "I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty." But history is often written in the margins of a map. And in 1846, a man named Lansford Hastings had published a new guide. Lansford Hastings was a promoter. He was a salesman. He had never actually traveled the full route he was selling, but he wrote a book called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In it, he claimed he had found a shortcut. He said if you left the established trail at Fort Bridger and cut south through the Wasatch Mountains and the Salt Desert, you could shave 300 miles off the journey. 300 miles. That's weeks of travel. To a pioneer family tired of the dust, that sounded like a miracle. But James Clyman, an experienced mountain man who knew the terrain, warned James Reed. He looked Reed in the eye and said, take the regular wagon track. It is the only route that can be traveled. If you take Hastings Cutoff, you will be lost in the canyons and the desert. James Reed didn't listen. He was a man used to making his own luck. He convinced the group, George Donner included, that the shortcut was their best bet. On July 19th, the main wagon train turned right towards the established trail. The Donnereed party turned left. They turned toward the shortcut. And the moment those wagon wheels turned in the dust, the trap was set. The Hastings Cutoff was a lie. Almost immediately, the terrain fought them. They entered Echo Canyon, a place of massive boulders and choking brush. The road Hastings promised didn't exist. The men George Donner, James Reed, and the others had to chop down trees and move boulders with their bare hands just to move the wagons 5 miles. 5 miles a day, then 2 miles, then 1. Frustration began to mount. The palace car, Reed's giant wagon, became a burden. It was too heavy. The oxen were getting tired. But the worst was yet to come. The Great Salt Lake Desert. Hastings had written that this desert crossing would take 2 days. He lied. It took 6. Imagine walking across a landscape of salt. No water, no shade. The sun beating down so hard the horizon seems to liquefy. The oxen, maddened by thirst, broke their yokes and ran off into the desert, never to be seen again. Wagons had to be abandoned. The palace car was stripped of its luxuries just to lighten the load. By the time they stumbled out of the salt desert, the group was broken. The social contract was fraying. They were exhausted. They were angry. And they were terrified because they looked at the calendar. It was October. In the 1800s, there was one rule for crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains. You must cross the pass before Halloween. If you try to cross in November, you die. They were weeks behind schedule, and the anger needed a target. On October 5th, tensions exploded. A teamster named John Snyder was whipping his oxen, trying to get them up a steep hill. James Reed, the leader, told him to stop. Snyder, delirious with stress, turned the whip on Reed. Reed drew a knife. In the scuffle, he stabbed Snyder in the chest. Snyder died minutes later. The group wanted to hang Reed. They wanted to kill the man who had led them onto this cursed shortcut. But Reed's wife begged for his life. So they compromised. They banished him. James Reed was forced to ride ahead alone, leaving his wife and children behind in the wagons. He rode off into the west, thinking he would get supplies and come back. He didn't know that he wouldn't see them again for 4 months. The party was now leaderless, dispirited, and racing against the sky. They pushed hard toward the Sierra Nevada range. They could see the peaks in the distance, jagged teeth biting into the sky. If they could just get over the pass, it was all downhill to California, downhill to warmth. On October 31st, Halloween, the forward section of the party reached the foot of the pass. The sky was gray. The air was heavy. It felt like the world was holding its breath. They camped at the base of the mountain, planning to cross the summit the next morning. Just one more day of hard climbing, and they would be safe. That night, it started to rain, and as the temperature dropped, the rain turned to slush, and the slush turned to snow. When they woke up on the morning of November 1st, there was 5 feet of snow on the ground. They tried to push the wagons through. The oxen floundered. sinking up to their chests. They abandoned the wagons and tried to walk, dragging their children. But the snow was too soft, too deep. They couldn't find the trail. They retreated back to the lake, Truckee Lake, to wait it out. It will melt, they thought. It's just an early storm. It will melt in a few days. It didn't melt. The snow kept falling, and falling, and falling. For 8 days, the storm raged. When it finally cleared, the pass was blocked by drifts 20 feet high. The trap had snapped shut. There were 81 souls trapped at the lake and a smaller camp nearby. They hastily built cabins. Some were log shanties. Others were just lean-tos made of brush and cowhides. The Donners, who were further behind, didn't even make it to the lake. They were stuck at Alder Creek, 6 miles away, living in tents made of wagon covers. November turned to December. The snow level rose to the roofs of the cabins. Inside, the supplies began to run out. First, they ate the remaining cattle. Then they ate the dogs. Then they began to boil the hides. They took the cowhides that served as roofs for their cabins, stripped the hair off, and boiled the leather into a glue-like paste. It had no nutrition. It just filled the stomach to stop the cramping. They caught mice. They chewed on pine bark. And all the while, the snow kept piling up. Patrick Breen, one of the fathers, kept a diary. His entries are short, unemotional, and terrifying. December 17th. Snowing. Wind SE outlook terrifying. December 21st. Snowing. Don't know what to do. December 24th. Rained all night. Poor prospect for any kind of comfort. Christmas came. A mother, Margaret Reed, had hidden away a few scraps of bacon and dried apples, a treasure she had saved for months. She boiled them into a soup for her children. It was a moment of love in the middle of hell. But the next day, the hunger returned, and then people started to die. By mid-December, a realization took hold. If they stayed in the cabins, they would all die. Every single one of them. 15 people stepped forward, 10 men and 5 women. They included fathers desperate to get help for their children, and mothers leaving their babies behind in the hopes of sending back food. They cobbled together snowshoes made from oxbows and rawhide strips. They packed 6 days of starvation rations, just a few ounces of dried beef each. On December 16th, they walked out of the camp and into the white abyss. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. It was a suicide mission, and they knew it. For the first few days, they made progress, but the snow was 30 feet deep in places. They didn't walk on the snow. They swam through it. On the 6th day, the food ran out. On the 7th day, the wind stopped and the sun came out. But it wasn't a blessing. It was a curse. The snow blindness set in. Their eyes burned as if filled with sand. Some went effectively blind, stumbling forward, guided only by the voices of the others. Then the storm returned. A blizzard so fierce it buried them while they slept. They huddled together under a blanket of snow, shivering violently. This was the moment. The ghost of hunger had fully taken over. One of the men, Patrick Dolan, went mad. Delirium took him. He stripped off his clothes, running naked into the blizzard, screaming at invisible demons. He collapsed and froze to death hours later. Then another died, and another. The survivors sat in the snow, staring at the bodies of their friends. They were 30 miles from help. They were dying, and the meat was right there. It began with the unspoken agreement. No one would eat their own relatives. They cut the flesh from the arms and legs of the dead. They roasted it over a small fire. They wept while they ate. They turned their faces away from each other, ashamed of what they had become to survive. But they survived. The food gave them the strength to stand. For 33 days, the Forlorn Hope stumbled through the mountains. By the time they reached the first settlement in California, a ranch in the foothills, only 7 of the 15 were alive. When the ranch owner saw them emerging from the trees, he didn't think they were humans. They looked like skeletons wrapped in rags, weeping and speaking a language of pure trauma. They had delivered the message, there are people dying up there. Back at the lake, time had lost its meaning. January passed, then February. The snow was now so deep that the cabins were completely buried. They lived in dark, icy tunnels dug down to the doorways. It was like living in a grave before you were dead. Inside, the scenes were apocalyptic. Tamsin Donner, the wife of George, was small but made of iron. She moved between the tents at Alder Creek, nursing the dying, refusing to eat so her children could have the scraps. George was dying of gangrene. He had cut his hand months earlier, and the infection was slowly poisoning him. They ate him. It is easy for us, sitting in warm houses, to judge. We think, I would never do that. But you are not watching your children starve. Mrs. Murphy took the body of Milt Elliott, a man she knew, a man she liked, and prepared him to keep her children alive for another week. The social structure had collapsed. There was no Donner Party anymore. There were just shivering animals in the dark, clutching scraps of blankets, waiting for the end. Patrick Breen's diary entries became shorter, more detached. Mrs. Murphy said here, yesterday, that she thought she would commence on Milt and eat him. I don't think she has done so yet. It is distressing. Notice the tone. Not horror, just observation. The horror had become normal. On February 18, 1847, a woman named Mrs. Wolfinger dragged herself up the snow ramp out of her buried cabin. She heard a sound she thought was a hallucination, a human voice. 7 men were skiing toward the camp. It was the first relief party. They shouted, "Relief! Relief! God has heard us." The survivors crawled out of their holes. They looked like ghouls. Their hair was matted, their skin yellow, their clothes rotting off their bodies. One child looked at the rescuers and asked the question that broke their hearts. "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" The rescue was not a happy ending. It was a triage. The rescuers could only take those who could walk. They took 23 people, mostly children. They had to leave 31 people behind in the snow, including George and Tamsin Donner. Tamsin refused to leave her dying husband. She kissed her children goodbye, sent them with the rescuers, and walked back down into the dark hole to die with George. It was the last time her children ever saw her. James Reed, the man banished months ago for murder, led the second relief party. He fought his way back up the mountain to save his family. When he arrived, he found his wife and children alive. It was a miracle, but he also found something else. At the Breen cabin, the rescuers found the occupants sitting around a fire. Near them were the mutilated bodies of the dead. The rescuers realized with horror that the survivors had grown accustomed to it. They weren't even cleaning up the evidence anymore. Reed took his family and as many others as he could. But the storms returned. The Starve Camp incident followed, where Reed's rescue party got trapped in a blizzard. For days, they huddled in a pit of snow. When the storm cleared, Isaac Donner was dead, and the survivors ate him. It was a nightmare that refused to end. Every time hope appeared, the mountain crushed it. By April 1847, the fourth and final relief party arrived to collect the last survivors. They expected to find no one alive. They arrived at the Donner Camp at Alder Creek. It was silent. They found only George Donner's body, wrapped in a sheet. Tamsen was gone. Then they went to the cabins at the lake. They found one man, Louis Keseberg. Keseberg was a German immigrant, a tall, imposing man who had been injured early in the trip. He was alone, surrounded by bones, half-eaten bodies, skulls. The rescuers were horrified. There was fresh firewood cut. There was a kettle over the fire, and inside the kettle was human flesh. But here is the chilling part. The rescuers found ox meat, good dried beef, still available in the camp. They accused Keseberg of enjoying it. They accused him of murdering Tamsen Donner, not for survival, but for her flesh and her money. They reportedly found Tamsen's gold hidden in Keseberg's waistband. Keseberg swore he was innocent. He swore Tamsen had died of the cold, and he ate her only to survive. He begged them not to shoot him. The rescuers described him as a wild beast. They considered hanging him right there on a tree branch. Instead, they dragged him back to civilization, the last survivor of the Donner Party, the man who had lived amongst the dead for months, alone. Of the 87 people who entered the mountains, only 48 survived. 41 bodies remained on the mountain. When the snow finally melted that spring, passing travelers found the remains. They gathered the bones, some gnawed, some broken, and buried them in a mass grave under the floor of the Breen cabin. Then they burned the cabin to the ground. They wanted to erase the memory. Today, if you drive on Interstate 80 through California, you pass Donner Lake. People water ski there. They have picnics. But if you stop the car and walk into the trees, you can see the height of the stumps. The trees that were cut by the pioneers. The stumps are 12 feet high. That is how deep the snow was. That is how deep the horror was. The Donner Party is often remembered as a story of ghoulishness, a campfire tale to scare children. But look closer. It is a story of a mother, Tamsen Donner, who chose to die holding her husband's hand rather than leave him alone in the dark. It is a story of fathers who walked into blizzards to save their children. It forces us to ask the question we never want to answer. If the snow was 20 feet deep and my children were starving, what would I do? Most of us like to think we are civilized. But civilization is fragile. It is only as deep as the snow. The survivors of the Donner Party refused to speak about what happened for the rest of their lives. But the silence couldn't hide the truth. What is your verdict on the final survivor, Louis Keseberg? Was he a monster who crossed the line, or a victim of impossible circumstances? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to follow us from the freezing mountains to the freezing ocean, make sure you subscribe and click the bell. Next, we are diving into the Pacific Ocean to tell the story of the USS Indianapolis, the ship that delivered the atomic bomb. only to leave 900 men stranded in shark-infested waters for 4 days. It is a story of survival that makes the Donner Party look merciful. You don't want to miss it.